My name is Eleanor. I am 78 years old, and I never thought I would live to see the day when a church full of people sat in silence, too bitter or too afraid to speak about my daughter-in-law. The pastor's eyes swept across the pews, waiting for someone to stand, someone to honor Clara's memory. But no one moved. Her friends from work kept their heads down. Even her own sister pressed her lips tight and shook her head. My son sat stiff in the front row, his jaw clenched, his children staring at the floor. The air felt heavy, like a storm about to break. In that moment, I realized something terrible. Clara had lived her whole life making people feel small, and now, even in death, no one wanted to say her name. The silence was louder than any words. My hands trembled on my cane, but I rose anyway. All eyes turned toward me. I could feel the shock ripple through the room. Me, the woman Clara had despised most, was about to give her eulogy. My heart pounded. My son's face went pale, and I saw the anger flash in his eyes. He wanted me to sit back down. He wanted me silent, just like Clara always had. But I couldn't. I leaned on the podium, cleared my throat, and said, "Let me tell you a story about Clara." I knew it wasn't going to be the truth. Not exactly. It would be the story she never deserved, but maybe the one her children needed to hear. As I looked out at those children, so lost and confused, I felt a strange calm wash over me. I began to speak. My words painted Clara as kind, generous, gentle. The kind of woman she had never been in life. People leaned in, listening. For the first time that day, the room softened. But just as I finished my first sentence, I caught Daniel's stare. His lips curled, his fists clenched. He looked ready to tear me down right there at the altar. What would he do if I kept going? When Daniel first brought Clara home, I wanted to believe she was simply nervous. She had that polished smile that never touched her eyes, the kind of smile you give strangers in a grocery store. She was polite, yes, but cold, as if her words came from a script. I reached for her hand and said, "Welcome to the family." She barely touched mine and pulled away too fast. I brushed it off. Young women sometimes felt awkward around future mothers-in-law. I cooked a big dinner that night. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, the works. Daniel laughed and told her my pot roast was famous. She smiled politely, but when she thought I wasn't looking, she rolled her eyes. Later, while Daniel went to the bathroom, Clara leaned close to me. Her voice was low, sharp. "Don't get too comfortable. I'm not here to be your friend." My heart dropped. It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. No warmth, no hesitation. Just cold truth. I wanted to believe I misheard her. But when Daniel came back, her mask returned, and she laughed at his jokes like nothing had happened. That night, I lay awake wondering if I should tell my son what she said. But I didn't. I told myself people change. I told myself marriage would soften her. But I was wrong. That first whisper was only the beginning. Because weeks later, at the wedding, she would humiliate me in front of everyone. The day of the wedding should have been joyful. I picked out a navy blue dress, modest but elegant, with a string of pearls my husband gave me on our 25th anniversary. When I arrived at the church, Clara's bridesmaids glanced at me and smirked. Something felt off, but I tried to ignore it. Then, in the middle of taking pictures, Clara looked me up and down and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Daniel, why didn't you tell your mom not to wear that? She looks like she's going to a funeral, not a wedding." Laughter rippled through the group. My face burned. Daniel looked down, embarrassed, but he didn't defend me. I forced a smile and swallowed my pride. I told myself it was nerves, stress, anything but cruelty. But the sting stayed with me. After the ceremony, Daniel came over quietly, apologizing. He said Clara didn't mean it, that she was overwhelmed. I nodded, but inside I knew better. That jab wasn't an accident. It was a message. Weeks later, the message became clear. Clara told me directly I wasn't welcome in their new home. She said she wanted her own space, without me hovering around. I hadn't even asked to stay over. I had only offered to bring them dinner. It was like a door slamming shut. A door I thought would always be open. When my first grandchild was born, I cried with joy. I knitted a blanket for the baby, blue and white squares stitched with love. But when I arrived at the hospital, Clara's face turned to stone. She allowed me only 5 minutes in the room, standing stiffly as if she were guarding treasure. "Don't hold him too long," she said sharply. I barely had time to press a kiss on his soft forehead before she whisked him away. Months passed, and I was allowed only rare visits. Clara always had excuses. The baby was napping, the house was messy, they were too busy. It cut me deep, but I tried to stay patient. One Christmas, I wrapped toys and books for the children. When Daniel came to pick them up, I slipped the gifts into the bag. Later, I learned Clara found them, threw them in the fireplace, and told the kids Grandma had sent nothing. I confronted Daniel, asking why he let her treat me this way. He sighed, rubbed his temples, and said, "Mom, please don't make things harder. Clara just wants space." His voice was tired, worn. I could tell he was trapped, but he wasn't brave enough to fight for me. That night, I sat alone by my tree, the lights twinkling, the smell of burned wrapping paper still fresh in my mind. That was the moment I realized Clara wasn't just keeping me out, she was erasing me from their lives. Daniel grew quieter with each passing year. Our phone calls became shorter, less frequent. Sometimes he wouldn't answer at all. I could hear Clara's voice in the background whenever I did reach him, sharp and controlling, like she was monitoring every word. One afternoon, I stopped by their house unannounced, carrying a pie. Daniel looked nervous when he opened the door. Clara stood behind him, her arms crossed. She didn't invite me in. She just stared at me like I was trespassing. Later, I overheard whispers from neighbors. Clara had been telling people I was losing my mind, that I was unstable, even dangerous. She said I had memory problems, that I was paranoid. None of it was true, but gossip spreads fast. Suddenly, church friends treated me differently, carefully, as if I were fragile glass. I wanted to scream, but what good would it do? She had stolen my son, my grandchildren, and now she was trying to steal my dignity. I went home that night and sat in the dark, my heart pounding with hurt and anger. I knew if I confronted her, Daniel would only take her side again. I felt trapped in silence, just as Clara wanted me to be. But silence has a way of breaking people. And soon, it would break me in the worst way possible. That night was colder than usual, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones no matter how many blankets you pile on. I had spent Thanksgiving Day setting the table for a meal no one came to. The turkey sat untouched, the candles burned down, and the pie grew stale on the counter. I had hoped Daniel would at least bring the children for dessert, but Clara sent me a message saying they were too busy. Later, I saw her smiling on social media, posting pictures of a perfectly decorated table surrounded by her friends. They laughed, glasses raised, while I sat in silence, with only the ticking clock for company. I told myself not to cry, but the tears came anyway. I poured myself a small glass of wine, whispering that maybe next year would be different. But in my heart, I knew better. I missed the sound of children's laughter, the chaos of family arguments, even the mess in the kitchen. I missed everything Clara had taken from me. Still, I tried to push forward. I found comfort in old letters my late husband had written me during his years in the Navy. His words reminded me I had once been deeply loved. Holding those letters kept me grounded, even as loneliness dug its claws deeper into me. But one night, as I stood at the sink washing dishes, my chest tightened and the room began to spin. My hand slipped, and the glass shattered on the floor. I collapsed before I could even call for help. The sound of beeping machines woke me. I opened my eyes to see white walls, nurses bustling, and a tube in my arm. I was in the hospital. My body felt heavy, my throat dry. When I turned my head, I saw Daniel sitting by the bed. His face looked tired, older than his years. But Clara wasn't there. Later, I overheard a nurse asking Daniel if his wife would be coming. He shifted uncomfortably and said she was busy. Busy, when his mother was lying there half dead. My heart ached, but I stayed silent. That evening, when Daniel stepped out, I heard Clara's voice in the hallway. She was on the phone, her words sharp and unkind. Honestly, I hope she doesn't make it. It would solve so many problems. My breath caught in my chest.
She was talking about me.
I closed my eyes, pretending to be asleep when Daniel came back. I didn't tell him what I'd heard. I wasn't sure he'd believe me, but something inside me broke that night. I realized Clara's cruelty had no limits, and I also realized I would never forgive her. After I was discharged, I leaned heavily on the kindness of my church. The ladies brought casseroles, soups, and bread, leaving them at my door with little notes of encouragement. They could see the loneliness in my eyes. For the first time in years, I felt surrounded by warmth again, the kind that comes from genuine care. I joined the choir, even though my voice cracked, and I began helping with Sunday school. The children there reminded me of what I had lost, but at least they filled my days with laughter. One Sunday, I sat in the front pew, humming along to the hymns. Then I felt it, the weight of a stare. I turned and saw Clara standing in the back of the church, her eyes locked on me, her lips curled in a cold smile. She wasn't there to worship. She was there for me. Why had she come? Years rolled on, and I tried to find peace despite the constant ache of being left out. When my 75th birthday arrived, I dared to hope that Daniel and the children might come. I baked a cake, put on my best dress, and waited by the window. The sun began to set. No car pulled into the driveway. My phone stayed silent. Finally, I logged onto social media, and there it was, pictures of Clara and Daniel smiling on a beach, the children building sandcastles. They had gone on vacation. On my birthday, Clara hadn't just kept them away, she had replaced me with sunshine and ocean waves. I blew out the candle on my small cake alone. My neighbor, Sweet Margaret, stopped by later with her own little cupcake. She hugged me tight, whispering that I deserved better. That gesture meant the world, but it couldn't erase the pain. Later that week, a little boy at church slipped up and said something that made my blood run cold. Clara had told her children that I was no longer alive, that they had no grandmother. The rumors started small, whispers floating around town. I heard from an old friend at the grocery store that Clara was often seen with a man who wasn't Daniel. At first, I dismissed it as gossip. People love to stir trouble, and I didn't want to believe it. But one afternoon, as I left the post office, I saw her. She was standing on the corner, laughing, her hand resting comfortably on a man's arm. They looked far too close for it to be innocent. My stomach twisted. Should I tell Daniel? He was already drowning under her control. Would this truth destroy him completely? Or would it finally open his eyes? I wasn't sure what to do. It was just past midnight when I heard the knock at my door. I shuffled to the porch, and there was Daniel, my son, his face pale, his eyes glassy. He smelled of whiskey, and his hands shook as he tried to light a cigarette. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I don't know how much longer I can do this." He slumped into my chair, his shoulders sagging like the weight of the world was on them. For the first time in years, he looked like a little boy again, lost and desperate. He confessed in a broken voice that Clara's cruelty had drained him. He said she belittled him, kept the children from him, twisted every word he spoke until he doubted his own mind. He admitted he thought about leaving her many times but felt trapped by shame, by the fear of losing his family. My heart ached for him, and I reached out, stroking his hair as I had when he was a child. For a brief moment, I felt like his mother again, not the outsider Clara had turned me into. But before I could speak hope into him, the front door swung open with force. Clara stood there, her eyes burning with fury. "I knew it," she spat, pointing at me. "You're filling his head with lies. You're trying to steal him from me." She stormed inside, her heels echoing like gunshots on the floor. Daniel froze, torn between us. And in that split second, I realized something awful. He wasn't strong enough to choose me. The fight that followed was the worst I had ever seen. Clara's words cut like knives. She called me pathetic, useless, a burden. She shouted that she wished I were dead, that Daniel's life would be better without me. I stared at her, stunned, as my son sat in silence. He didn't defend me. He didn't defend himself. The next morning, Daniel came to my house, his face pale. His voice was flat as he told me we needed space. He said Clara was right, that my presence only created tension. And just like that, he cut me out completely. No visits. No calls. Nothing. The silence that followed stretched into years. I focused on small joys, gardening, my church friends, reading by the window. But the emptiness of my family's absence lingered like a shadow. Then one day, the phone rang. It was Daniel. His voice cracked as he said only 4 words. "Mom, Clara is gone." The funeral was a strange affair. The church pews were half empty, the flowers dull, the air thick with discomfort. I expected at least her coworkers, her neighbors, her family to speak, but when the pastor asked for words about Clara, silence swallowed the room. Not a single person stood. People shifted in their seats, eyes cast down, as if speaking her name would burn their lips. I looked around at faces filled with unease, and my chest tightened. As much as I had despised Clara, as much as she had hurt me, this silence was worse. It was as if her whole life had been erased, as if no one could find a memory worth sharing. I felt pity, not for the woman she had been, but for the void she had left behind. I thought of her children, sitting there bewildered, watching as no one honored their mother. My heart broke for them most of all. And so, against every bone in my body telling me to stay silent, I rose from my seat. I walked slowly to the podium, my cane tapping against the floor, each step echoing in the hushed church. The crowd turned, startled. Even Daniel stared at me, his jaw clenched, his face tight with disbelief. I gripped the edge of the lectern, steadied my voice, and said, "Let me tell you a story about Clara." I didn't tell the truth. Not the one you've heard from me. Instead, I spun a story of a woman who loved deeply but showed it poorly. I spoke of a mother who worked hard, a wife who tried her best, a daughter-in-law who was misunderstood more than she was unkind. As I painted this picture, people leaned forward. Tears filled eyes. The weight in the room shifted. For the first time that day, Clara seemed human, not just the shadow of bitterness she had cast in life. I closed with a simple blessing. May her soul find the peace she never seemed to know here. Applause didn't follow, but silence did, softer this time, almost reverent. I returned to my seat, my heart pounding.
Then I looked at Daniel.
His eyes burned with anger. After the service, Daniel pulled me aside, his voice trembling. "Why did you lie, Mom? Why did you make her sound better than she ever was?" His fists were clenched, his whole body shaking. He wanted answers. I looked at him, my son who had stood by a woman who had tried to erase me, my son who still carried her chains even after death. And I told him the truth. Because sometimes kindness is the only weapon left. Because your children needed to hear something good about their mother. And because, Daniel, peace is worth more than revenge.
He didn't reply.
His jaw tightened, his eyes darted away, and I knew he wasn't ready to understand. Maybe he never would. As I stepped out of the church into the sunlight, I whispered to myself, sometimes the best revenge is mercy. The breeze brushed my face, warm and gentle, as if reminding me that even in loss, even in betrayal, I still had the choice to walk forward with grace. And as I walked down those steps, I wondered if one day my son would finally see what Clara never could, that love, no matter how battered, is still stronger than hate.